Teaching with the dark arts, workflows and substance. How many of you guys have heard of substance slash maybe use it at work or at home? Okay, so there's quite a few people here. Hopefully, what I show you guys will be interesting and some of it new. Some of it might be boring, but it's going to be a mixture of a little bit of an introduction to some of the concepts in Designer. I won't be touching on Painter, although I do use it as well. I'm just going to be covering the design aspect, how that is integrated into my pipeline that I use at home and both professionally. So these are some of the techniques that I use here. I use at work as well. Yeah, and I'll just give you a little bit of an insight into how I've learned Designer and how I've learned to utilize it for my needs. So my name is Reuben Smith. I'm a 3D artist at Whitney Workshop, and I am part of a team that's working with Magic Leap to produce some cool stuff. It's pretty hush-hush right now, and I can't talk about it whatsoever, but we are a game studio, and that's about it. I'm very fresh in the game industry. I started in about 2015, about April, I think it was. And just before that, I had finished my degree, done digital media course. Kind of fell in love with real-time graphics somewhat, fucking around in Unity, mainly Unreal. And that just basically took off. And I was lucky enough that my main project was a VR one, and it got me a job at Whitney. So yeah, so I've learned a lot of my game dev skills pretty quickly in the last 2 years. So hopefully this is useful to you guys. So at Whitney Workshop, the art team is pretty small. We're only about 6 or 7 people, and we do all the art for what we're working on. So we've got, everyone is pretty multi-talented. We do conceptual art right through to final in-game asset creation, and everything in between. So we're all good and pretty well versed at 3D asset creation. We know the baking process. We know how to get models from a conceptual level right through to a physical level, digital physical level. Some of us are animators, some of us are texture artists, and what I've fell into, my groove at Whitney, has kind of been maintaining the art pipeline. So working with some of our pipeline developers to automate our art pipeline, set standards, quality standards, checks and gates, as well as I've helped introduce substance into our pipeline. However, this is not going to be a talk about Whitney Workshop. It's not like Weta endorsed. I'm not speaking for Weta in any way, but I do work for Whitney Workshop, and what we get is some of it I use at work. So pipelines. So I like to keep pipelines pretty simple. Like less is more, in my opinion. Keep it simple. So I come from a pretty traditional background. I didn't own a computer until university, so I'm pretty handy with a pen and paper. And I like to sort of sketch things out on pen and paper as much as possible. It keeps it free, keeps it loose, and it keeps you sort of getting ideas down without doing too much detail. So I do a lot of idea generation on paper and refinement in Photoshop and Illustrator. And then we bring it all through Maya, and Maya is our hub for a lot of things. We've got a lot of tools that we've written. And from Maya, we then use our Substance Designer and Substance Painter up top there. And obviously, from Maya to our engine, and repeat the process for all the art. So, like Substance Designer and Substance Painter has been really useful in terms of just, it's a new way of doing of texturing, and it's, for me, the procedural aspect and the dynamic aspect of Substance has really helped improve my iteration process and helping me free up the technical, detach the technical from the artistic, and I can kind of focus on the art and just get creating more and more and get more stuff out. So the video wouldn't work, so just let me go through and find the video. So I've got a video of my Maya process that I use. I'll just go through how that works. So that's not going to work out. I've heard very loosely, so we'll see how this goes. So this model that I'll be using throughout the entire presentation is just my little texturing ball that I use. So it's like it's a 1 by 1 meter asset. It's got some basic UVs and low topology, but it has a high resolution mesh that I bake down to it. So I use this for all my texturing. I'll go through my texturing process and how I use materials and all that kind of stuff. But I create everything using this asset, and then I package it up and make sure it's dynamic enough that it works on other assets too. So this is my go-to for anything I'm doing. So I've got a high poly mesh. It's all edge looped as you would. Matches the low pretty well. Got enough definition. There's a lot of interesting details. Recesses, grooves, a lot of angle changes, so you get like nice areas of highlight. So it's built specifically to show off features of materials as much as possible. It's round, it's got flat planes, all that kind of good stuff. It's also vertex colored, so you will use this for, I use this for the ID map, so this is that we separate out materials and all that kind of stuff, and that's just vertex colored in the mesh display menu. Pretty easy stuff, and it's also, I have a unsmooth and smooth version, so I convert the smooth mesh to polygons as well. Yeah, and so that's my Maya setup. I export those out to a folder structure, and I'll show you my folder structure. Right, so it's pretty important for me. I like to keep my stuff pretty tidy. I stick to a pretty intense naming convention that I use. So like, ever since I started work, I've kind of made sure that my professional work, or like my freelance work, for example, is all named and categorized, so I don't, things don't fuck up. So I have this folder structure for every single asset that I make. And it's just a bunch of folders where you dump your FXs and your textures and keeps it nice and clean. So I'd highly recommend, if you don't use a folder structure right now, to use a folder structure like this, as well as adhere to a naming convention. So Substance. So when I first started at work, that was around the time that I was playing with Substance for my freelance work, and I had kind of heard about it before then, but one day I decided, like, okay, I'm just going to try it. So I pitched it, and I loved it. The non-destructive aspect of texturing is just like icing on the cake for me. If I can not like bake things down or destroy things in my pipeline process, all the better. I was also playing around with PBR, so I've done a lot of offline rendering in Arnold and Mental Ray, so I was used to a physically based rendering system, so this was actually a really nice treat as well. That out of the box, natively, it supports PBR. Procedural, so I'd never really used procedural stuff before, but Substance provides a really powerful procedural library. A lot of noises and stuff like that you can blend together to get really nice realistic effects too, if that's what you want to achieve. As well as it's highly art directable. So like one of the main things for me is like I generally have a vision of what I want, and I'd want to preserve as much of that vision as possible, and like the procedural aspects is really powerful. And as well as like it scales, like the resolution scales so fast as well. So it's nice and fast. And it's native integration into game engines and software packages. So you can bring the Substance graphs into Maya, into Unreal, into Unity if you want to, and not have to bake out bitmaps. So that was also quite cool. And I don't really use that feature that much, but I'm beginning to use some of it now. It's really, really, really cool. So what's going on there? Okay, empty. That's all good. So one of the things about Substance that I really like is templates. And Substance works on a system of graphs, and the graphs are basically wrappers for nodes. And every texture you create, you're creating a graph, and you're using that graph to process some instructions to achieve a result. So more often than not, you'll be having a base set of instructions that you want to start off with. You might be creating a tileable texture, and you might want to have a particular setup for that. So what's really good about templates is that you can build them as a graph, save them out to a folder, and then read them into Substance as a template. So I use this quite a bit. Like I've got a very particular setup I use for previewing my materials on the mesh inside of Substance. I've got a export packet down the bottom, so that processes the outputs and packages them, so it puts particular textures in particular channels and spits those out. So I've got my engine-ready maps that I use in Unreal, and I've also got my basic material setup. So like when I want to create something, open this up, and I'm good to go. And I can just start plugging away and creating my textures, and not having to worry about the technical side of setting up stuff. So that's a really nice feature of Substance. So materials, this is kind of the crux of it. Whenever I create a material, I usually have a few things in mind. I want to kind of utilize the aspects of Designer as much as possible. So I always want to make sure that whatever I'm creating responds to resolution changes. So whether it's a small map size or a big map size, the scalability, I always build into my graphs. I try to make use of mesh data, and I'll go over what mesh data is in a bit, but part of the reason why I use Designer is that it can respond differently to a mesh, so you can plug different meshes into these graphs, and then the graph will automatically texture based on the shape of the mesh and what you've baked out. I try to keep it artist editable as well, so like whenever I'm building materials, I try to expose parameters and make sure that that particular node has a bunch of options that I can tweak to make sure that it looks good in every model. Sometimes what looks good in one model looks good in another model, and then you'll need to edit that. So I use PBR quite a lot. This also, like Substance works really well for most texturing guidelines, but I try to keep it as close to the PBR creation guidelines as possible. It's pretty strict, and there's certain ranges of albedo colors that you must fall into. So I tend to like create things roughly around the PBR creation guidelines. Obviously, like what looks good, so feel free to change it as much. And obviously, it must look good. So if it looks terrible, then keep going and make it good. So when I create materials, I've kind of got this structure that I use. I've got base materials, which are just the basic information of a surface type. So like a steel, and a steel has a base steel albedo color, and rubber will have a base color and a roughness. So these are just values that will be inherited in the actual materials. What I'll often do is I'll make multiple versions of a material, like a worn steel, a polished steel, a standard steel that I use. So all those will use the base material. So yeah, material variants created using inheritance. It's fast to make changes. I love the fact that assets can be using these material graphs, and you just update that one graph and it goes updates everything. And it's very fast to create assets. Once you've got your library built, of course, so like I'll go through what I do is for a library, but once you've got your library done, it's very, very, very fast to process assets, but you have to have that library done first. Okay, so here's some examples of materials that we use. On the left, we've got standard, and we've got a polished, and we've got a worn kind of version of a brass. And so this brass is created from a base material, and then each material only contains the changes needed to create that variant. So you can update the base material or propagate through the these materials, and then you'll have the variants. Same with this, so copper. Same with these, paint. So a lot of these have like editable parameters that I use. You'll have noise values to get the bumpiness. You'll have dirt. That's a separate graph. So all these are multiple graphs blended together to create this final result. Rubber. So this example, I've got the standard one on the left, and the one on the right is a variant with just a small crisscross pattern. It's probably really hard to see in here. And the cool thing about this is that you're texturing live and you're seeing it in a real-time render window inside a Substance. So any edits you make, you know that what you see in the window is correct for the changes you're editing. There's no abstract between the two. And of course, some skills. So this is like part of the library that I've built. So yeah. So this is what a typical graph looks like. I try to keep it quite lightweight. The thing with the nodes is that they actually take that each node is a performance cost, and so the entire graph costs time to process. And so the more nodes you have, the longer it takes, and the slower it is. How much battery do I have? We'll see how this goes. So yeah, and so like if I just go back a little bit. How do I go back? Do I play it again? Oops. Oh, there we go. Okay, so it's taking the mesh data on the left. We've got input images. So these are the bitmaps. These are the noises. These are the things that are used to construct the surface variation on the model. And those are processed into masks. So masks take a lot of the mesh data, and again, I'll show you what those look like in a second, and convert those to black and white masks to tell the material where to put the dirt, where to put the edge highlights, where to put everything like that. And I separate everything into very clear frames, so it's readable. So if anyone who hasn't made this comes in and wants to tweak some stuff, it's obvious as to what does what and where things go. And a lot of this is just blended. So like I usually start with the color, then I'll add dirt, and then I'll layer it in sequence until I achieve the result I want, and then I plug it into the right, which is the output. And so what you get in the end is you've got a standalone material that can take mesh data, process that mesh data to give you a material result, and it spits it out at the end. So it's pretty cool. Does that work? I'll go next. Probably going to skip like 17 slides for all that. Uh-oh. Is there like a way to go next? Okay, let's go disable this one. Videos are quite possibly the worst for pictures. So let's go to the next one. Okay, cool. So, no, go back one. So, let's put this into full screen. So the material ball that I use is set up like this. It's using a template, the asset template that I showed you previously, where it sets up the input, the preview nodes, and the export packet on the bottom. But each material, each asset tends to have its own mesh data structure on the left, which contains a bunch of information about the model, as well as I usually have a material section in the middle where I plug all my materials into. So this is what a typical asset graph will look like. Pretty simple. Nodes and nodes. And I tend to layer my materials into it. So this is an example of what the material looks like. So this is the mesh data graph. And so what I've done is I've separated out the model information from the material graph. And I try to keep it separate because you might want to make edits. For example, like I've made an edit to the material ball here by adding in like a black and white stamp. So I've made the asset without that, and I've added this in. And so I have this in a separate graph because I want to add that information, that new stamp information, to things like ambient occlusion, to normal, to curvature, because those are the maps that drive a lot of the textures. So having that in a graph kind of keeps it self-contained. And what's cool about this is I can now take this graph, call its mesh data, and drop it into another graph if I want to. So it becomes sort of its own module that can be reused and repurposed for later on. And so part of my workflow is always using height. So using black and white grayscale data, and then processing that into normals, processing that into the curvature, and processing that into the ambient occlusion. And I'll go through the mesh data. I hope it's going to happen again, or it's not going to go next. Hey, it's going to go. Tools. Okay, so go back. Okay, so Substance works on mesh data, and mesh data is basically bitmaps, so texture maps that contain they're basically baked through various processes and give you various data types of that model. So this one, for example, is a world space normal map. It's a normal map that encodes every axis as a different color, as opposed to a tangent space normal map, which just contains the changes of the surface direction, I suppose. And so, like, the reason why you would use this is because it contains all axes, up or y, x, and z. You can isolate parts of the model based on those channels, so you can kind of split them out. This is really useful to get like dust settling on top of your model, or if you want to use triplanar projection, so like you want to project your texture onto a model and blend it across seams. This is what you'll use. Curvature, one of my favorites. I love this. It's taking the change in angles of a model and baking that to a texture. So what you get is you get white for each highlight, so you get black for crevices, and you can feed this map into some of the mesh data, the mesh filters, and you can get out really cool effects like dirt and crevices. And so, like, for every asset, we bake these maps, and as long as these maps are baked for assets, the materials are expecting these maps, plug them in, and the material's kind of good to go. It's pretty simple. Ambient occlusion. So we bake two different types of ambient occlusion. So we've got, I also use this personally as well. So we use a wide AO for texturing. The reason why is that a lot of the material and mesh filters use a higher distribution of the AO to texture correctly or mask off areas correctly. So we've got one that's a very soft AO with a long fall off, and we've got one which is much tighter that we use for in the engine. So two different AO maps, one used purely for texturing and one used for the engine display. This is quite cool, position. So this bakes a gradient of the model in all axes. And so what you get is you get gradients that go through the X and the Y and the Z. And you can use those individual channels. It's an RGB map to get things like you can mask off the bottom of the model. You can get a color gradient going from top to bottom, or you can put this into like a leaks filter. And what it uses is it warps the leaks down the gradient. So you get things like if you've got rust, you can get rust dripping down the model by using this. Thickness is really cool. It's like a reverse raycast, so takes the opposite normal and casts it until it hits something. And what you get is kind of like a density of the model. So really thin objects get rendered out a different color, and really thick parts of the model get rendered out. Oh, there goes my laptop. It's okay, I'll plug it in. So organize yourselves. I dropped this laptop, so it's like trying to just be a little bit silly sometimes. Alright, we're back. Sorry about that. Probably should have tried my laptop. What was I saying? Thickness, that's right. This is a reverse raycast. You can use this for stuff like subsurface scattering. So if you want to get like a sweet backlit effect, I mean, like, how many of you know what subsurface scattering is? Okay, good. For those that don't know, it's the effect of like translucency. So if you held a flashlight behind your hand, you'll get thin parts of your flesh coming through, and you can see like the redness coming through your finger. So that's kind of what this map does. This is kind of a really bad model example because there's just some weird stuff going on, especially with like the sides around here. But really good if you want to get like a glowing core to your model. If it's like molten hot, you can use this map to give you a really nice effect like that. And obviously color ID. So this is the vertex coloring that we were talking about with the mesh. Bake that to a map, and this is how you assign different materials to your model. Pretty self-explanatory stuff. Right, so generators. So this is what I was talking about with how you can use the mesh data to drive effect. So these on the left is like a dirt filter. These are the default ones that cover substance. So like you can use these out of the box if you want to, or you could build your own complex ones. I've got some pretty cool effects, things like peeling paint that peels around the edges of a model. But like dirt on the left, the middle one is like a metal edgeware, so like wearing on the edges, and the right is dust. So that's settling. If you look at that, it's settling just on the top of the model, and that's using the world space data, and it's converting or it's masking out some of the channels, taking that black and white information and crunching it down to give that effect. And the dirt is just taking the even collision and the curvature, and it's masking off the black areas and using those to drive where dirt might go on the model. And so like a combination of these, they're highly exposable too. So you can go in and fuck with parameters and get it looking good. You can add your own noises in, so like you might have a particular noise that you built procedurally, or you might have a bitmap that you use as well. You use those in these. So this is the bread and the butter, I would say, of making a dynamic material, is using these generators, as well as, okay, so what's this? I don't remember this. Oh, this is a texturing model. Okay. Must have some more slides in somewhere. So this is how most assets would start off if I was going to texture them. You would have a template. That template contains, like I said, the input, the preview, and the export data, as well as the mesh data is already set up. And you would just drop in your material. So here I am in Collapse View, hooking up the various materials to the model. And so put out to the input, so preview it on the mesh, and instantly you've got like a metal effect using the mesh data, fully procedural. And on the right over here, you can see that there's a bunch of parameters that I can fuck around with. So I've exposed like scratching and dirt and like the pitting of the model. So I've got like pitting in here. So a lot of that you can tweak to your heart's desire and make it look good for that model. So now I'm going to add in a new material. This is going to be a brass, and I'm going to apply that to a different area. So the way I usually texture a model is kind of think about how, if this was a real thing, how would it be constructed, and build it from the ground up. So I think about its core material. So if it's made out of metal, so do the metal first. So yeah, this is the brass. I would isolate where those base materials go. So here I am taking that color ID data, masking it off. So this handy little node, color to mask, you pick a color, and it turns it into a black and white image that you can use. Now I'm going to blend these two materials together using a material blend node. And a lot of this stuff I use like the default stuff that comes with Substance as well. And it's only really when I don't have an effect that I like, or there isn't anything out of the box that can't give me a result that I want, then I'll make my own stuff. I'll make my own generators, I'll make my own filters and nodes and all that kind of stuff. And I'll generally use that and put that into a library and make sure that that's accessible for myself in the future as well. It's good as you're going to build these things and build up your own library and make it work for you. Because like it is kind of bare bones what Substance gives you, and it can result in a very samey feel, which is, most things can look samey if you just use the same tools that everyone else is using. So It's good to switch it up. So here I'm going to add in paint. So this paint is going to be blended over top. So again, like base metal, I'm thinking about the metal would be painted. So the paint goes over top of the metal. So this is more like the structure and the flow that I'll be using. And give me 2 seconds. It takes a while to drop in the particular node that I want. So plug the data in, and this is the metal edgeware that Substance comes with. Yeah, plug that in. Thing with masks is that white generally shows where you want the top material to go, and black shows the bottom. And here I've got it inverted for some reason, so I need to invert that. And that's really what's really cool about Substance is that there's a bunch of tool nodes, things that do like simple transform procedures like scaling and inverting and all that kind of stuff. So using those gives you a really nice result. Plus, you can also like toggle them on and off if you wanted to see a particular effect. And you can see already, like, it's taking the curvature data and it's kind of like putting the noise around where the edges would be. And so, like, I've got another generator that I use here, which is like a paint chipping effect. So I'll like blend 2 masks together to get a result. I'll use the edgeware to give me like fine kind of wearing, and then I'll use the paint chipping to give me a larger chipping result. And this one here I've built my own using a bunch of noises that I've made and a bunch of generators that I've made as well. And so yeah, blending these 2 things together. And what's cool is non-destructive results. So like this graph that I'm using, I can package this entire graph up. If I wanted, if I had 13 assets that do the exact same thing, package the entire graph up as a node, and then just drop that node into every asset, and then you get the same result for everything else. So here, you kind of see the chipping effect. And like the materials or the nodes work kind of like Photoshop layers. They've got blending modes. They kind of do as you would expect the blending modes to do. So here I am like setting it to the correct blending mode so I can get the paint chips to appear on top of the model, as opposed to like subtracting from the current mask and all that. Like multiple was the one I'm using. There you go. So like blending masks. So achieving like photoreal results or achieving results that don't look procedural is all about just blending noises and blending masks together until you achieve the result that you want. And like that's kind of it really. Like, out of the box, if you just use 1 or 2 of these results, yeah, you'll get something that looks very similar to someone who's starting out. I make something, but it's just like blending of these things together kind of give you a very varied result. So like this paint graph that I've made, you've got a bunch of colors that you can use. I've got preset colors in there, and I've got a color picker too that you can pick. So again, like now I've got my paint, my chipping. Next thing I'll do is like add dirt and some grime. So again, like how it would be in real life. So just like kind of think about how this asset would kind of be, I suppose, in real life. Like if it was left out in the rain, you might get some rusting, you might get tops of the model being worn away. And the cool thing is like you can build all those kind of effects into your graphs as well to achieve those results. So here I am using like base material. I use this one quite a lot if I just want a single color, or also like something that's very flat. Normally I'd have like a rust package, but I didn't get time to make one. So I'm going to be blending, I think this is going to be the rust. Not so sure. Yeah. Color, set the roughness, set the material properties of the rust, and then blend that over top of the graph that I've currently got. And so just copy and paste that material blend, hook it in, add a mask. So it's just like kind of rinse and repeat, right? Like you blend 2 materials and you mask up where you want the top material to go. You're just doing that over and over and over again, so you get like a nice result. I'm experimenting right now with how I would do that in Painter, so like the interaction between these 2 programs. I'm not totally sure if you guys use Painter here, but it's another really powerful tool. Kind of confusing why it doesn't integrate fully into Designer. It's like in the same company, very similar program, but they kind of don't really talk to each other in a way that I would like. But I'm kind of figuring out how the interaction things like paint on a model is very, very nice, and like being able to paint exactly where you want the detail to go. So here I've got like, I'm using a leaks or a rust leaks, and it's using the positional map, it's using those gradients that I baked to pull or warp the texture down that gradient. So I've masked off green channel, which is a top-down gradient. So the bottom is black and the very top is white. Gradient in between, that's able to pull the streaks down the model like that. And so if I was like, yeah, again, like package this up and put another mesh into it, you would get leaks going down the model but in a very different way. So it's kind of nice how you can randomize it. And every procedural effect has a random seed too. So you can just hit that random seed button and either find a random result that you like, or just randomize it for every model so you can get something that's similar but not quite the same. And so here I am going to blend in some dust, I think it is, using the world space, or using the world space mask or mesh data. This just uses the dust filter that comes with substance. Again, like they're really powerful, and you can use them to great effect, I think. So yeah, plug the data in, and it's giving me the result already. Plug it into the mesh material blend, sorry. So already it's looking, it looks pretty cool. It's obviously spend time dialing in details and noodling over it and making sure it like actually works for you. But like to get a quick result fast, I'd say that's money well spent, because time is money really, and the less time you have to spend like doing this stuff, the better. Especially if you've got a scene you want to create with a lot of assets, getting this rapidly textured is quite good. Especially because like PBR materials require a good lighting system to work with, and a good lighting system requires good PBR materials. So like having something there for the lights to interact with gets you a really good sense of how a scene would be lit or whatever. So yeah, that's kind of it. That doesn't have any controls, so I think that's going to stop in like 2 seconds. I think I'm not entirely sure, but this seems to be an older version of my talk that I've been to. I've got like a bunch of other slides. This is such a I'm messing this talk up so bad. I'm so sorry guys. But hopefully that was interesting for you guys. How much time we got?
About 8 minutes.
Okay, I'll take some questions. Does anyone want to like throw something at me? Ask me some questions about anything? Anything at all?
Any UV tips for working with substance?
Oh yeah. Okay. So if I just go back to a slide. So how many of you guys are used to like baking high poly models down to low poly models? It's kind of like my jam somewhat, right? So there's like, if you're baking, there's obviously very specific UV rules that you have to follow. Like where hard edges sit, so how your smoothing groups are done. So it's not necessarily for substance, but it's like good UV practice for baking. So like extreme angles, split UVs on extreme angles. Try to put UV seams where there are natural details in the model. So what I've done here is I've purposely built in. Just go like can I go back to slide 4 or some shit. There's one. It was the video. That's right. Put this up again. So I've purposely put, I've made the number of sides of this model correspond to exactly where the high poly detail sits. So if I go exactly where this detail here goes, so like when I'm texturing, it ends in black, it doesn't look like a bad scene. What I've done is I've also mirrored some of the parts. So you can see here I've got one half of the model mirrored over. So I kind of am a big fan of mirroring when it looks good. So if I can get away with saving some UV space, scaling up some of those UV shells and all that kind of stuff, I'll do it. But yeah, otherwise it's like splitting your edges on extreme angles and hardening those edges as well.
There's nothing too special compared to just
not really. Not particularly. Yeah, it's kind of the same. Any other questions?
A lot of the principles that you use in Substance Designer, you could use in Painter. Is there any reason why you would use the designer method, use the designer method?
Okay. So Painter with its smart materials doesn't have like an ability to update smart materials on the fly. So if I'm, say, texturing 10 assets and I've made a smart material and all those assets use that smart material, if if I update this smart material, it's not going to update my assets. So what I want to have is I want to keep a workflow where the models and the materials talk to each other, and you update the material, updates the model, you update the model, updates the material, that kind of back and forths. Especially if you're batch baking, right? So what's really cool is Substance has got I think the batch tools where you can automate a bunch of assets through a material. So that's what we're beginning to use at work, and this is what I'm still learning to do in my spare time, is building these graphs and actually not even touching Substance, running it through the batch baking tool. Because what's cool is that you can automatically build a Substance graph, place material nodes inside of it, and then run a export process on that without ever having to open up Substance. It's just more flexible, I think. Epic Games has got a really nice workflow where they use Painter to only paint masks, and they use Designer to construct their texturing graphs, I suppose. So all the texturing's done inside of Designer, so they can update their materials on the fly. They just feed in painted masks into Designer. So it's all about like, I kind of think in terms of more than one asset when I'm doing this stuff. Like how would a scene be done? Anything more than like 20 assets gets really annoying to update. Yeah. That's the reason why I don't use Painter exclusively for texturing, even though it's like much better for that kind of detail. I'd still use it for hero assets, so if you've got like a character or something like that, I'd definitely use Painter. The silly thing is that you build materials in Designer and you can't import those materials into Painter necessarily, or there's not a really easy way to do that. So you kind of have to build two libraries of materials. That's another annoying feature too. Yeah. So, thank you for sitting through this like horrible